Hey everyone. Well, I'm very sleep deprived and I'm so happy to be with you here today because I was wondering if I would be. But thank you so much for being here with hundreds of people. It's amazing to see you all here. You know, it's a bit of a tough job to be talking about things that are considered highly heretical by everybody out there. And today we're going to dive into a little more and discuss some things that don't come up. I haven't talked about much, and there's kind of a reason for that. You know, it's difficult to know what's really going on in the world, yeah? For 2,000 years, people have had this inkling that Jesus was about to return right in their day. And today is no different. But today is a little different in that it's, you know, throughout history, we've looked at things and tried to fit them into some of the prophetic texts. But now we live in a time where you don't really have to fit them in because it's starting to become very black and white. I think this is going to continue as we move forward. We will begin to see that some of the things we've interpreted, misinterpreted in the text are going to be seen in a different light as we get closer to the time of their fulfillment and we actually watch their fulfillment happening in real time. Many of us feel that that's what's happening right now, right? And I certainly do. And so I've been kind of sitting on the fence for a long time, wondering, you know, is this it? Or am I just mistaken, like many people have been for a long time? And certainly I'm not the only person. There's many Christians out there who also feel that, well, this is it. There's something going on right here, right now. And I agree with them. I agree with them totally. There is something going on in the here and now. So these Sunday services are, we're going to just continue to talk about the gospel of the kingdom, and we'll talk more and more about different aspects of it each week. So it won't be highly repetitive, but there will be some repetition because we've got so many new people coming in here all the time. And then starting on Wednesday nights, this Wednesday, we'll start turning that into a study evening where we'll start unpacking more of the text. But this Sunday service, I want to remain a gospel message, a time where we get to explain what's happening, what's going to happen, what the whole story is. I think that's really necessary right now. So this will be a gospel of the kingdom Sunday service. And today we're going to look at some fresh stuff, but we'll kind of go over some of the stuff we looked at last week as well. And we'll just keep building on this. We're going to spend some time here in worship in a moment with some wonderful hymns. I've been struggling with sleep. I've struggled with insomnia all my life. My brain just does not switch off. And so I'm very sleep deprived right now. I'm struggling a little bit. I didn't sleep at all the night before last. And last night I didn't really get to sleep, and I got up, or I think I slept finally from about 8 o'clock this morning through to 1 p.m. Terrible. So doing my best, but there's a lot to get through, and I think we're going to see Jesus real soon. I think a lot of us feel that way. I think we feel that way for good reason. But some of the things that we're going to have to talk about are contrary to some of the things that you may have been taught throughout your church life. And all I want to do is justice to the Father and His Son and their kingdom, and do my best to unpack what's in the text. And so we'll just keep doing that. Hope you're okay with that. Sorry, I am a little bit tired. So last week we kind of looked at the differences of Christianity and what we're looking at right now. We're not going to go through all of this, but let's just have a little bit of an overcap, right? So Christianity is one religious system among many. We see all these different religious systems all around the world. And when we kind of pull out and look at all these different religious systems, whether we're looking at the religious systems across China, Southeast Asia, the Mesopotamian region, India, South America, we start to see that there is a ruling class of individuals, gods, and the Christian would say false gods. But that's kind of an arbitrary measure that we put there to say they're false or real or what have you. These are real people. And if we start to cross-reference these different pantheons of gods all around the world, we start to see that there's a striking similarity between each one. If we look at the primary figures, we see a father who is actually mostly absent, and then we see two primary sons. And we see them just across the spectrum. And we can see that the sons in each of these different pantheons all seem to have the same nature, the same characteristics applied to them. We see one that is predominantly associated with air symbols. We see the other one primarily associated with water symbols. And so you start to realize that, hang on, that's a little bit beyond coincidence. You know, how do you do that? All these different epochs of time, they didn't have the internet, so they weren't communicating with each other, right? Surely. Or were they? And so you wonder, how was it possible to have all of these striking similarities? And some anthropologists will say, it's just the creation of people's minds. That is kind of falsified by the similarities between them all, especially when we start looking at some of the symbols. And for those of you that have seen my study on the handbags of the gods, I need to update that with some more information. We'll look at some symbols here in a minute too. But we start to see that there are identical symbols. We see a tree of life that is common to all of these different cultures. We see these gods holding what looks like handbags or buckets in their hands. And we see similar stories about how humans were created by these gods, how the tree of life works, a flood story. A flood story is one of the most common stories that we find across the world, and of course in the Bible. And what happens is we get stuck in a religious system like Christianity, and it kind of boxes us in. And we're told that, well, you just have to look at the Word of God. And what they mean by that is not Jesus, who is the Word of God, but the Bible. And how can you be a truth seeker? How can you be one that is seeking first the kingdom of God if you limit yourself to a book compiled by the very empire that murdered our Lord? You can't. So you've got to look far beyond that. You've got to look at all the evidence. And when I started doing this now about 8 years ago, after spending a lifetime in Christian ministry, and I live in the United States. I came to the United States on a religious worker visa to work for a ministry in East Texas that I was already working for in New Zealand. But I started to look more and more at the archaeology, all the things that we were finding, all of the symbolism across all of these different cultures, and starting to see, wait a minute, as someone who's studied the Bible all my life, I can see the similarities between what we find when we go to an archaeological dig, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, and on Pillar 34, where we see the handbags of the gods. And you start to connect all the dots and realize, hang on, there's a much, much bigger story going on here. There's a kingdom that is here on this earth whose extended family are talked about, written about, carved into stone, that exists to this day, that we can go up and touch, or at least look at in a museum, and see there's something real going on here. And so we hoodwink ourselves when we limit ourselves to a religious system, whether it's Christianity or whatever it is, and we don't look at the big picture. We don't look at all of the evidence. And the beautiful thing is that as I looked at all of the evidence, and I kind of went on a mission of blank slating all of my beliefs and just laying them down and saying, you know what? If Jesus is real, if Jesus is true, Jesus will float to the surface. So I don't have any fear. I'm just going to forget everything and start over, taking a fresh look at all the available evidence that we have. And everything points to Jesus, no matter where you look. You start to see the sibling rivalry between these two primary sons of the king. These are the two most well-known figures throughout all of these cultures. Well, those stories connect with the Bible, and that's what I've spent, the last 8 years of my life doing, is unpacking, discovering and unpacking all of those connections. And the great thing is, it just all points to Jesus. So you can feel safe in laying down your beliefs. Just let them go for a time and start looking at all of the available evidence. There's a YouTube channel, I don't have it prepared here or anything, but there's a YouTube channel called Mystery History, and they publish videos. They haven't published anything new for a little while now. I think they're kind of regurgitating stuff, but that's okay. And I would put these videos on my screen, and I would put them on double speed, and I would turn the sound off, and I would just have them on loop all day long, and I would just keep looking up at the screen and seeing, wow, look at that. There it is again. Different culture, but that's the same symbol. Oh, look, this is the same person. Different culture, same person. We can't deny this. We can't look away from this and go, oh, no, that's not Christian. So maybe Christianity isn't right. Maybe Christianity doesn't have the big picture. Maybe Christianity is just a tiny little sliver of the whole pie of information that points to Jesus and his kingdom. Maybe that's why he told us in Matthew 6:33 to seek first the kingdom and what has his Father's approval. And that's what my life is all about. And that's what your life should be all about. And I hope it is from this day forward. So even Christianity, so let's read this. Yet Christianity itself has many thousands of variants that all contradict each other in small and significant ways. So the Christians attack me, as you see, all the time, relentlessly. I'm a heretic. They call me a heretic so often that I actually put it into my bio. Yeah, I'm a heretic. Just means that I'm against the mainstream views of Christianity because I think they're wrong. I don't think the church fathers understood. The church fathers had such a dilapidated view of the Old Testament that they invented the Trinity when the divine counsel is right there in the text in numerous places for us to understand how the relationship of the Father and the sons of God all coexist together. We don't have to fear this. All we have to do is put Jesus first and we'll be okay. That's what he said, right? I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father but through me. And if we just remember that and we continue to put Jesus first in everything, if we look at his words in the Gospels and we just start to dissect them and to meditate on them, to understand them, the more we learn about Jesus, from the Gospels, the more everything starts to show a very different story than the one that was handed down to us by the church fathers, right? And Christianity has really kind of set itself up as a religion of fear and lies. It really has. It scares people into the Catholic Church. Of course, now, I don't know the breakdown of Catholic to Protestant, and there's Orthodoxy as well, but that's pretty small, although it's having some resurgence right now. But you see how fear-based it is. If you don't believe what we believe, if you don't believe in the Trinity, you're not a Christian. Well, okay, maybe that's not such a bad thing to not be a Christian, actually. Maybe that tells us something. If we have to believe in something Jesus never taught his disciples about, that is nowhere in the Gospels, or any of the rest of the text, period, then perhaps it's okay to not believe in things invented by men over the hundreds of years after Jesus, right? So maybe we shouldn't worry about the fear that these people are trying to instill in us, because perfect love casts out all fear. We don't need to walk in fear. We just need to walk with Jesus, right? I hope everything is going here. I didn't really do a check, but it looks like everything's going fine. I'm not getting any messages from anybody saying that something is broken. So humans have a tendency to want a religion. They want to believe they have the truth without knowing they have the truth, without spending time searching for the truth. Now, this is a truism. So I think it's okay if you're not somebody that wants to spend an exhaustive amount of time like I do, digging into all of these things and trying to find out what's going on, okay? You know, Jesus really came to tell us about the kingdom, that he was on a rescue mission, and told us how to live life because we would be grafted into the kingdom. Jesus is looking for human beings that are good people, people that are going to do the right thing. Not people that are perfect. None of us are perfect. But people that really want to put others before ourselves. People that want to treat others the way that we want to be treated. That's what the kingdom is looking for. Because we have an opportunity to be grafted into the kingdom and to live as they do with biological immortality, right? The gods are not ethereal, disembodied spirits. We are made in the image and likeness of the Elohim. We are Elohim light. I said that last week. A few people found that kind of funny, but that's true, right? We are made in their image and likeness. We see even in Genesis chapter 6 where they can reproduce with us. And I don't know how a spirit can reproduce with a physical human, okay? So we are like them. We are made in their image and likeness. In other words, we look like them. We're made in their image. And we have this body and the spirit just like they do. And I think Jesus is coming. And I don't have any of this written down here, but a lot of people think that Jesus is coming and we're going off to heaven. But that's not the case. That's not the story of the Bible. That's not what Jesus taught us. Jesus taught us in the Gospels and in his revelation to John that we would coexist with the kingdom here on this earth, that the kingdom would come. You remember his prayer, the Lord's Prayer, where he's talking about asking that the Father's kingdom would come to earth because this earth is not his kingdom, it's Yahweh's kingdom. And that's one of the big mistakes Christianity has made. Christianity wants us to think Yahweh is Father God. But that's not a loving person that sends his son to come and pay this incredible price to set us free. Not unless he has schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder. Must have had a huge change of heart. And yet we're told God never changes. So when Jesus returns here, there'll be turmoil in that process, as I think we're starting to see right now with the military incursions into Ukraine by Russia and the strengthening of Russia and the genocide that's taking place in Gaza by Israel, and obviously a large brewing war that's fomenting in the Middle East, where Israel now is really killing a lot of people in Lebanon, even though Lebanon right now is kind of waving the flag and saying, hey, we want peace talks. And I think they are engaged in peace talks right now, yet Israel continues to bomb them. Now, that's not to say that, it's not to excuse that there are some men there that are, very willfully attacking Israel. And both sides feel that they're in the right. And you can just see this whole thing getting really out of hand. And now we've got two figures that are really starting to become, or have become, world famous, and everybody is looking to these two figures. And I don't even have to mention their names. You know exactly who I am talking about: Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Now, I've been talking about these two figures for a very long time, long before there was any relationship between these two of any kind. And yet here today, we're seeing this incredible union between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Two figures that I love. I mean, I think Donald Trump has a lot of good characteristics, some negatives, definitely. Some of his picks for cabinet positions are a little questionable, and some are really great, like RFK Jr. And Tulsi Gabbard. But what's going on there with Donald Trump, the peacemaker, that's seemingly coming in, taking over from a lame duck presidency, the Biden presidency, where the Biden presidency seems to be pushing the accelerator to the floor to increase the war between Ukraine and Russia. And Russia not backing down. And I think a lot of people tend to think Russia is a bit of a pushover. And, well, why haven't they won this war? And I've kind of talked about this a little bit on our Telegram group. If you're not on my Telegram group, I strongly encourage you to do that. I talk about a lot of things there that I wouldn't dare talk about on X or Facebook or anywhere else. So we've got war fermenting in the world that might actually become a global nuclear war. And even if it doesn't go nuclear, it looks like it's still going to become quite a significant war. And it's going to bring in Iran, and can't avoid bringing China in as well. China has Russia's back. If Russia started to be defeated in any way, China would step up and support Russia. China has no interest in allowing the NATO group of countries and the United States to win over Russia. That would be a great hindrance, a great loss to China. And so China will step in and say, no, we're going to help these people. And even got smaller nations like North Korea sending troops to be trained into Russia. So there's a lot going on, and there's ways to look at these things and ways to look at some of the prophetic texts and go, wait, isn't that what it's talking about in the Bible? And I've kept my mouth shut until now, because, as I said in the start, people for 2,000 years have really thought, well, this is it, and they've been wrong. There's the preterist viewpoint, which is the idea that, well, everything happened in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And I don't agree with that. I think you have to ignore 90 to 95% of the prophetic texts for that to fit in. So I think that those things are happening now, not going to happen. I think they're happening now. And I've talked about these things with my friends. I've been sharing these things on Telegram for many, many years. Now it's time to start to perhaps make a fool of myself. I can just do the best that I can in looking at what's going on and making sense of it and sharing it with you. And I might make mistakes. C'est la vie. Such is life. But I think we've moved beyond the point where I can remain silent about these things any longer. Right? One of those things is all of the UFOs in our skies. We've got just a plethora of UFOs. In fact, just last night, 3 bases in the United Kingdom, military bases, were visited by UFOs. This was talked about by a number of people. Yeah, I don't know if you've heard it. It hasn't really. These things don't really get into mainstream news, but they're talked about more by independents. But we're seeing this increase in the UFO presence, and of course, what does Christianity say about the UFO presence? There's 2 predominant trains of thought that you'll see with Christians. One is that the UFOs are just fake, or they're drones, or it's Project Bluebeam, but they're not real. They're not extraterrestrials. They're not from another place, right? You've even got Tucker Carlson that I think has been wildly, deceived, and has kind of picked up on this Christian train of thought on these things. Oh, these UFOs are manifestations of demons. It's a little baffling and concerning to hear Tucker Carlson speak like this. And then there are people in the government that are speaking along the same lines. And we'll look at UFOs here in a little bit in some religious art, and we'll see that the UFO presence is not new. Certainly since nuclear weapons started to be tested in the 1940s, we saw a massive increase of UFO sightings. But now, today, in the last couple of years, I mean, I remember, it must have been, I'm guessing about 5 years ago, I think, I made a prediction that somebody would actually live stream UFOs on their phone. And that's kind of hard to fake, all right? And I didn't realize that it would actually be me about a year later that did that. Filming orb UFOs, these kind of orange, pearlish colored spheres, large numbers of them, floating over Boulder, Colorado, floating out to the horizon and catching the sunlight. And those live streams are still up on my Facebook for all to see. And I think that we're going to see in the next few weeks, months, years, mass sightings where large numbers of people, hundreds and thousands of people, are going to see large, very obviously metallic craft vehicles. And that's going to become a much bigger conversation than it already is now. But from all the things that I've learned from looking through history, understanding the Elohim, the gods, the people that made us and how they get around, it just makes perfect sense. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. We'll dig into this a little bit more just below. But last week we looked at kind of who we are, and we looked at some of the evidence of who we are. Oops. I've talked about some of this just now. Same royal family all over the world. The documents that we have, whether they're coming from clay tablets that have been buried in the ground for thousands of years, that we then excavate in pristine condition, and the vast majority of them still have not even been translated and made available. The Oxford Library in Oxford, UK, is responsible for housing the Sumerian tablets, and they're doing an incredibly slow job of translating those and putting them online. But we do have a number of very interesting ones that have given us a lot of information, and they all point to this same royal family. They're telling us the stories of how humanity was created. And we might find a few differences here and there in comparison to the biblical narrative, but not a whole lot. These differences really can be put down to just the understanding that the author had, and creative people imagining and using their own language, not having a real language to describe these things, and putting it down, and we're able to get that, today, and see that, if we're fair, we can see that, yeah, there's a lot of ease in matching up these stories, okay, especially the characters. And I think some of these stories are just kind of creative stories, just like you'd find in some of the more wacky, newspapers that you find in the UK, which are kind of strange, like the Daily Mail and things like that, these tabloids that invent all kinds of weird stories. And I think you find a lot of that also all through antiquity. But they're talking about the same people, and that's what's important there. So we've got a royal family that's made up of the Elohim. The Elohim is the royal family. So we would speak of them like the British monarchy. Okay, the royal family in England comprises, well, it depends how far out you go from the monarch. You've got an immediate royal family. You could say there's probably 10, 12, 15 really senior members, where most of those people, if I was to have them here on the screen and mention them, you would go, well, I've heard of them at least. I may not know much about them, but sure, I've heard that name, Prince Edward and these kinds of things. You go, yeah, I've heard of those people. And then you've got the larger royal family of people that you don't really hear a lot about. But that royal family extends for many thousands of people. In fact, I think my own lineage, I think it's the same for most people that have descended from that region of the world, are in line to the throne. But it's like millions upon millions of people have to die before you get there. But that's the Elohim. The Elohim is this royal family, and the ones that we're concerned with mostly are the ones that are on the divine council, right? So the divine council, or the council of the Elohim, comprises the 12 highest ranking members of the royal family. These are the decision makers. And we get this information, obviously, from extra biblical sources, from sources outside of the Bible. Yet it's also strange that Jesus chose how many disciples? 12 disciples. And so there's some interesting parallels here. So we already talked about this. They're people like us, and we're made in their image and likeness. We have a body and a spirit like they do, and they can reproduce with us. So we can have intercourse and produce offspring. And that might sound outlandish, but it's right in Genesis chapter 6. It's in the Bible. It's in your Bible. It's in every Bible that's ever been printed. And so then we get to the king and his sons, and we see passages like Psalm 82, where we have this meeting of the Elohim. We have the meeting of the divine council. And we have this group that were given purview over certain regions over the earth. And we see the Father speaking to them, and some of them obviously have not been doing the right thing. And we see in ancient texts, where these ancient Sumerian texts, where Yahweh was not particularly fond of humans, didn't like humans. And of course, we see that all throughout the Old Testament. He's not exactly very fond of humans. He just murders them left, right, and center. So Whereas you see Jesus, you kind of got two sides of the family here. A side of the family that loves humans. They made us. They're very, very happy with us, and they want us to be part of themselves. And then you've got others who, these are a subspecies, and we're not really, really keen on these people at all, and we'll be happy to just to wipe them out in a global flood. Who cares? Like Yahweh did. And so we see this, the king and his sons, many sons, but two primary sons. So it's not just two sons. Christianity tells us, no, they're not physical people. They can't reproduce. They're not making love with each other and producing offspring. No, you're crazy to even think that. but the Bible kind of speaks to this. So if we ignore a whole ton of the Bible, we could come up with a Christian story and try to think that, well, this might be the true story. But when we start to actually include all of the Bible, the bits and pieces that the church fathers had no clue about, the church fathers never said a word about the divine council. Now, in recent years, the recently departed Michael Heiser, he is probably the most famous Christian that has talked about the divine council, and he wrote a book called The Unseen Realm. And I consider that he got the majority of his understanding of the divine council wrong. I have a study on the divine council, an introduction to the divine council, and I think you'll find that worthwhile to dig into. But this divine council is talked about in the text. It explains the problem that the church fathers invented the Trinity to try and explain. And we don't need to go with these inventions made hundreds of years after Jesus, and now to the point where it's such a dogma that you're told, if you don't believe in the Trinity, you're not a Christian. Well, that's okay. I'm not a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm a seeker of the kingdom. I don't have to belong to a religious system. Jesus didn't come to give us the correct religion. He came to set us free from religion and tell us about the kingdom. And that's the big difference between, the way I see things today compared to when I was a Christian in ministry. So we've got these two sons, and these two sons are kind of not real happy with each other. Jesus, who absolutely adores us, he's literally the person that made us. And Yahweh, who's just came along later and is not happy with us at all. And of course, heaven is a real physical place. And we see that when we look in the end of Revelation, when John sees a new heaven and a new earth. It's not a non-physical place. It's not a non-physical place, right? It's a real place. You got to think, why would Jesus, in his conversation with Nicodemus in John 3, be talking about needing to be born again? Why? Why would we need to be born again to enter the kingdom? And today, the Christian has kind of gone on a Gnostic track, which is what they accuse me of all the time. I am absolutely not a Gnostic. The Gnostic is always trying to turn what is literal into metaphor. They'll say to me, no Gnostic out there. The only people that claim I'm a Gnostic are the Christians. The Gnostics, no, absolutely. Israel Anderson is not a Gnostic. I reject wholesale this Gnostic philosophy of turning what is real and literal and physical into non-physical. The Gnostic says the physical world is evil, created by Yahweh, and we want to get away from the physical world. No, all of this takes place in the physical. The physical realm is the realm of the Elohim. It's the realm of the gods. We get resurrected. Maybe some of us will survive from now until the return of Jesus, and there will be peace on the earth. But for those of us that don't make it, and a lot of us will not, we will be resurrected. Well, when Nicodemus was listening to Jesus talking about being born again, Nicodemus said to Jesus, hang on a second, how can somebody who is old re-enter his mother's womb and be born again? And Jesus is like, you don't understand these things? Nicodemus grasped what Jesus was saying. There's a real physical born again that needs to take place for those that have perished or will perish yet. Jesus existed before, but he had to come as a newborn 2,000 years ago. He was born again. Exactly what he was talking to Nicodemus about. That's why we need to be resurrected. If we're going to enter a non-physical heaven, why on earth would we need to be resurrected? And that's why some cults, they will say, well, you're not being physically resurrected. Well, what kind of resurrection is it? And this is the Gnosticism that pervades Christianity. The number one criticism that I receive, you're a Gnostic. I am not a Gnostic. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they were accusing me of being a Gnostic. And I went on to an AI, and I said, give me the top 10 views of Gnosticism. And only the last one that it talked about, and I can't even remember what it was now, I mildly agreed with. All the rest I flatly reject. And yet when you look at Christianity, Christianity always wants to turn what is real, physical, literal, into something that is non-physical. That's Gnosticism. That's what the Gnostics do. That's not what I do. I do the exact opposite. I correct those errors and say, no, you're being a Gnostic by trying to say that all of these things that happened in the past, all of these gods from all of these different cultures all around the world, all of the future events, where Christianity says these are all non-physical things. I say, no, they're not. These are very real physical things that are going to occur. So how can you possibly say I'm a Gnostic? Christianity likes to turn things into metaphor, so it can turn things into non-physical things and make any argument at once, because then it's so open to interpretation. Now I come along and I say, no, you're doing Gnosticism here. You need to stop. The things that Jesus is talking about are far more literal, far more physical than Christianity would ever agree to. So let's look at some new stuff today. Let's look at let's kind of look at this, but I think, we'll just take a quick squiz at this. So, and then I want to look at UFOs, and we've got some pictures to look at. They kind of show us that the UFOs have been here all along, and we can see it all through religious art. And if you haven't seen some of these images before, I think you're going to be quite surprised. So, excuse me. John 8:44. Now, this is a passage that the Christian has tried to shoehorn into all kinds of interesting shoes to escape what it's actually saying here. And what they want to do is really focus on this part. This is one verse, John 8:44. And so actually, let's just separate this a little bit. And so they kind of want to stop here, and they want to start accusing the Jews that Jesus was speaking to at the time and say, well, they weren't worshiping Yahweh. They were worshiping Satan, the devil. Well, they're one and the same, but I know you don't agree with that if you're a Christian. But But it doesn't work with the rest of the context. It doesn't work with the whole discourse. And we're about to do a study I've been working on for a long time on the whole discourse, which starts in John 8:12 and runs all the way through the end of John 8. And that includes John 8:58, the I am passage, which is the number one objection that is given to me. And so we're going to cover that in detail very soon. In fact, we might do it this Wednesday night if I'm ready. So Jesus said, you people, talking to the Jews, are from your father, the devil. And they're just talking about their father in this discourse. And one person stepped forward and said, Abraham is our father. Well, that didn't really work out with some of the others that were standing there. So somebody else steps forward and says, no, God is our only father. Okay, talking about Yahweh, all right? And then Jesus says, you people are from your father, the devil. And what does this word mean, devil? The adversary. The adversary of the kingdom, the adversary of Jesus, the adversary of humanity. Okay? So you people are from your father, the adversary. And you want to do what your father desires. What were they wanting to do to Jesus right at that time? Murder him. Okay, so there's a big clue. But the Christian will so often ignore all of the rest of this passage here. And this is really important because it gives us some descriptors. And these descriptors only fit one person. And that's why they won't touch them. That's why they don't want to continue reading. This is the context, right? Jesus says, you people are from your father, the devil, and you want to do what your father desires. Then Jesus says he was and begins to describe him. Wow. How can we ignore that? If we're going to have this big argument on who Jesus is talking about here, your father, the devil, surely we want to include the context, because Jesus then uses a whole lot more words to actually define who he's talking about, who the individual is that he's referring to. So let's read it. He was a murderer from the beginning. And this word beginning here is a reference to Genesis. Genesis means beginnings. Bereshit in Hebrew, one of my favorite words. He was a murderer from the beginning, from the Genesis. Big clue. You might go, oh, that was the snake in the garden then. Oh, okay. Well, let's keep reading. And does not uphold the truth, because there is no truth in him. Whenever he lies, he speaks according to his own nature, because he is a liar and the father or the progenitor of lies. So he's a murderer from the beginning. He does not uphold the truth, because there is no truth in him. Whenever he lies, he speaks according to his own nature, because he is a liar and the father of lies. The Christian wants you to believe, well, this is talking about the snake in the Garden of Eden. But if you watch Two Gardens and a Snake, my study on that passage, you'll learn that actually the snake didn't lie to Eve or to Adam. The snake told the truth. And later on, just a few passages later, Yahweh steps in, standing before the council, the divine council, and admits that what the snake had told Eve was true. The snake told Eve that Elohim, Yahweh, knows that when you eat the fruit, you will be like Elohim, knowing good and evil. And it's amazing. I've seen so many people say, see, he lied. What do you mean he lied? Just a few verses later, Yahweh himself says, they have eaten the fruit and have become like us. Okay, so the snake did not lie. The lie was told by Yahweh, who said, in the day you eat of it. And I know a lot of people like to play around with that word day, but scholarship is on my side of the argument here. Yahweh's talking about a standard, normal, 24-hour day. And that same word is used to represent a standard, normal, 24-hour day over and over again through the rest of the Hebrew Bible. Okay? Yahweh said, if you eat it, you'll die. Trying to tell them that it's poisonous. You can't eat it. And Eve said, oh, no, we can't eat that. If we eat it, we'll die. And the snake goes, wait a minute. What are you even talking about? No, you won't. And I know why the snake thought that, because that tree belonged to the snake. It was his garden originally. So we have this lying murderer from the Genesis. Who is that? You can argue that it's the snake. Good luck trying to do so. You're going to find that the majority of scholarship, including basically 100% of secular scholarship, that is, Hebrew scholars that don't have a religious bias, will tell you that according to the Hebrew language, the only person that lied in that Garden of Eden story was Yahweh. And Yahweh effectively murdered Adam and Eve by cutting them off from the very thing that sustains your life, gives you biological immortality, the fruit of the tree of life. Two different trees, right? So we're looking for somebody who was a murderer and a liar from the Genesis. Who might that be? Well, if you want to think it's the snake, have at it. You can think that, but there's another option here. Let's take a look. Yahweh removes the Hebrews from Egypt that he had abandoned long ago. So he had abandoned these people in Egypt. They've been living there a long time. That's why Jesus said, I'll never leave you nor forsake you, like Yahweh did. Okay, he abandoned them multiple times. This is the Babylonian captivity. He just got up and left. He doesn't really care for these people. Okay, Jesus says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. But Yahweh had a habit of leaving and forsaking the Hebrews. Okay, he removes them from Egypt, and he lies to the Hebrews about rescuing them. He says, I'm going to rescue you from the few problems that you have here in Egypt, and I'm going to take you to a much better place, a land flowing with milk and honey. And we've talked about this many times. It's about a 3-week journey for the 2.5 million people or thereabouts that were there, that got up and left with Yahweh. And instead of traveling 3 weeks to a better place, which was the promise, he allowed them all to die in the desert. No, all but 2, okay? Joshua and Caleb were the only 2 people that survived. And Yahweh tells us why, because they were the 2 that sucked up to him the most. So Yahweh lied. The whole pretense of leaving Egypt was to go to a better place, to escape the hardships of Egypt and go to a better place. And yet just 6 weeks later, the Hebrews lament ever having left Egypt and want to go back. And that upsets Yahweh no end. They spent 40 years until they're all dead, but 2 of them. And the only other people that entered the promised land were those that were born after they left Egypt. That's cultural genocide. It's what's happening in Gaza right now. There's no need for what's happening in Gaza right now. Some response would have been expected, of course, after what people did to Israel. There's questions about that still. But not the slaughter of innocent children that we are seeing on this unbelievable scale that the majority of the world has just turned a blind eye to. But that's the nature of Yahweh and his people. That's what they do. Now, I'm not against the Hebrews. I'm not against the Jews. They have been gaslit and used by Yahweh, and we should understand that. It doesn't mean we okay what they're doing, but it does mean we should have some understanding that they are the creation of the Lord Jesus. And they are being used and persecuted and trauma bonded to Yahweh. And they're the ones that are carrying out his wishes on the earth. Yahweh said that he would make his people in control of the whole earth, and that is basically the situation we do have today. We need to remember that Yahweh said he was going to put them in the position that they are in today. Okay? So when you meet a Jew, I'm not a Jew. Some people think that because of my name. What does my name mean, Israel? The one who wrestled with Yahweh and overcame. I had no idea it would end up this way. Names are powerful. They mean things. And so then Yahweh commits unbelievable murder. The greatest mass murderer in the Bible is who? Yahweh. Why did he take the Hebrews out of Egypt in the first place? It wasn't to take them to the promised land, obviously. I mean, that's just the given, right? But if you're a Christian and you're being conditioned to come up with all of these excuses, while they were grumbling and complaining, okay, and if your child grumbles and complains, do you murder them and bury them in the backyard too, or not? I don't think you do, right? And if you heard of somebody doing that, you would say that's a bad thing. You wouldn't go, well, the child was grumbling and complaining, would you? No. So why do you do it with the Hebrews? You've got to be careful about the way you think about these things, the way you're conditioned to think about these things. I made all these same excuses all my life, so I understand. But we need to repent of that. Okay? We need to follow Jesus. We need to learn his way. We need to treat others as we would want them to treat us. And that's not what Yahweh did. Okay? Yahweh tells us why he removed the Hebrews from Egypt. Because he wanted to make his name great throughout the earth. Isn't that what he's done? He said he wanted to create a military to go and wipe out all the people all around about. And that's what he did. That was his first action that he took with the Hebrews. 6 weeks after they left Egypt, they took a census, count how many military fighting men over the age of 20 there are. There were just over 600,000. That's where we get the figure 2.5 million from. We extrapolate that number from the 600,000 fighting men. If we were to consider that the vast majority were going to be married and have children, and then they're going to be their parents and all that kind of thing, some scholars say there was between 7 and 9 million. So I'm being very, very conservative. I've used that number for a long time. 2.5 million, it's an extremely conservative number. 2.5 million people, he builds a military superpower. He doesn't even win all of his battles. There was one time where Yahweh sent his people up against another army and they lost. And the text tells us why. Because the enemy had chariots made of iron. Oh. Yahweh, the creator of the universe, according to Christianity, couldn't even defeat another army because, well, they had chariots made of iron. Yahweh's not who Christianity tells us he is. But if we were to read through the Exodus story, you can go through my Table Talk series of talks and you will see we go through some of the major points of the Exodus journey. And it's just a bloodbath. What Yahweh is doing is trying to eradicate all knowledge and memory of the past from these people. It's a cultural genocide. He's wiping their memory. So all the people that entered the promised land 40 years later had no recollection of Egypt except for Joshua and Caleb, who were going to keep their lips closed because they sucked up to Yahweh. Well, they saw what happened to Aaron and Moses. Once Aaron and Moses were of no use to Yahweh anymore, he just murdered them as well. He's the lying murderer. Yahweh is the greatest lying murderer in the entire Bible, from Genesis through the Old Testament. Yahweh is the lying murderer from the beginning that Jesus is talking about here. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not uphold the truth because there is no truth in him. Whenever he lies, he speaks according to his own nature because he is a liar and the father of lies. He's just using these people. These are people that were created by Jesus. That's why Jesus says, I came to my own, and they did not recognize me. They rejected him. That's the Exodus tragedy. It's not a pleasant story. There's so much we could get into, but I want to share this with you. How are we doing for time here? Right, we're already gone for quite a while here. So we're going to change gears completely, and we're going to talk about Jesus and how he left and how he returned, and a little bit about the rapture. Okay, so we might be here for a little bit this evening. I hope you like that. I guess I'm losing my tiredness, which is good. Jesus leaves and returns in a UFO. Now some of you are thinking, this guy is out of his mind. All right, so let's read here from Acts chapter 1. So when they gathered together, they began to ask him, Lord, Jesus, is this the time when you are restoring the kingdom to Israel? So even at this time, they did not get it, right? One of the criticisms I often get is, well, you think you know more than the church fathers? The disciples didn't even get it. And Jesus said that to them multiple times. Like, how long do I have to stay with you? How long will it take for you to get it? Right? Is this the time when you are restoring the kingdom to Israel? But Jesus wasn't the prophesied Jewish Messiah. He's the Father's Messiah. Messiah is a title, not a name. That's why I like it when people say Jesus is king, not Christ is king. Christ is just the Greek and the English term for Messiah. Okay. Jesus told them, you are not permitted to know the times or periods that the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the farthest parts of the earth. You see the incongruency in the message between what they were still thinking when they're looking for a restoration of the kingdom to Israel. But Jesus is saying, no, you will be my witnesses to take his gospel of the kingdom to the ends of the earth. He spent 3 years with them. He's gone to the cross and is resurrected at this point. They still didn't get it. So we need to be careful the way we're reading it. Context is very important. Context is everything. Let's continue. And this is a very interesting passage. And many people over the years have speculated about this passage and what it's really saying. And I agree with a lot of these people that have speculated that it's talking about Jesus leaving in a UFO, a vehicle. Okay. After he said this, Jesus said this, while they were watching, he was lifted up, and a cloud hid him from their sight. So they're looking into the sky, okay? As they were still staring into the sky while he was going, suddenly 2 men in white clothing stood near them and said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand here looking up into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken up from you into the heavens will come back in the same way you saw him go into heaven. So is Jesus, did he leave in a UFO, in a vehicle, a spaceship of some kind? If so, he's coming back in one. If we look at the times when Moses and Elijah, the 2 witnesses to Jesus' fulfillment of the contract for humanity, and we see the bright white light all around and things like that, it's just like what we see in reports of up close encounters with UFOs. You may say, well, that's a bit of a stretch, and I agree. it is. But just wait a minute. Then we've got the rapture. Okay. Now, a lot of people, when you start talking about the rapture, and this, right now, I've been in ministry 40 years of my life, and you see these trends come and go over time. And right now it's very popular to say, well, the rapture is not real. That the rapture is something that has been born out of the Schofield Reference Bible. Well, I am not sure I've even ever seen a Schofield Reference Bible. They're pretty rare. They're around. Your grandparents may have had one. But they're not very common. And I haven't learned anything from one of those Bibles. I probably should get one just for reference. I'll probably pick one up easily on Amazon. So the rapture. Let's read this passage from Matthew 24, verses 40 and 41. Now, Jesus repeats himself here. He tells the same story in two different kind of ways. Let's take a look. Then there will be two men in the field. One will be taken and one left. There will be two women grinding grain with a mill. One will be taken and one left. And there's lots of extrapolations about this. And, you can imagine the Left Behind series was very influential. And that came around, there was a series of Christian novels. I read all of them at that time. And the idea was that people would just vanish out of their clothing. Their clothing would just be left behind. I guess they're floating naked or something or other. So they dematerialize. Not sure how that works, but this is a very popular view for a long time. I don't think that's what's going on here. What do you think might be going on here? I think what's going on here is a vehicle is coming down and calling out to people, and a person is taken. Someone's name is called and saying, come with us. And I think this is what's going to happen. I think the rapture has actually been occurring for a long time. I think some of the South American civilizations that have simply vanished off the face of the map, where archaeologists and anthropologists have gone to these sites and determined that they have no understanding of what happened to this civilization. There's no signs of conflict. It looks like everybody just suddenly left. Now, everything was left in its place. Nobody packed anything up. That it's like people just walked off. I think that's what's been happening for a long time. I think it's possible. I'm not completely sold on this or anything. But I think it's very likely that Jesus and the kingdom have been rescuing pockets of civilization for some time. And that they have been removed. And I think that we're going to see it again soon. And I think it's going to be literally a knock on the door, or it's going to be quite obvious that something just landed in the backyard and people are asking us to come, and you are whisked out of harm's way. I think that's the majority of the cases will be people that are in direct harm's way, that for whatever reason the kingdom decides we want to remove those people from harm's way are going to be. Now, with all of my studies in more of the ancient stuff, all of South America, even after Yahweh was given purview over the earth, where things were divided up, those areas were given to Jesus. Those were his people, very, very, how you would put it. Just they have a closeness. They were direct worshipers of Jesus, not Yahweh. And I think that that's why they were removed. I think we're going to see this again in the present day, potentially really soon. But maybe I'm wrong. I'm not sold on this, and this is speculative. But I think this makes sense. I think this makes a lot of sense. So we'll see what happens. Now, This is one of the solid reasons to think that this is probably how it is. The UFOs in religious art. Now, let me get this queued up for us here. I need to do some stuff just behind the scenes here. And we will look at some of this religious art. And I might have to just move things around like this. So we're just in a web browser here. We see lots of religious art all through history, and we'll see all these thumbnails here, and we'll take a closer look at some of them, where we see figures that could potentially be UFOs. Here's Jesus being baptized, and you can see the dove like a Holy Spirit. But the interesting thing is, let's see if I can zoom. I'm zooming, but it doesn't want to let me zoom. Okay. Can you see how on the top of this dove, there's a round disc, kind of like what we see on military spy planes. You've probably seen the spy planes. They have this huge round disc on top of the plane, okay, in aerodynamic shape. And I think I found some examples. Okay. I can't find my cursor. Here we go. All right. So we see this winged disc. This winged disc represents the Father, the King of the kingdom. He has a vehicle, and his vehicle is shaped like this. And it may have actually even been the craft that flew over Phoenix some time ago. But we see this round disc across all these different cultures. And of course, Christianity rejects all of this kind of talk. But this winged disc has represented the Father's craft across multiple different cultures. Let's look at this one. This is one of the more famous ones here. I really wish there was a way for me to blow this up. That's taking me to the website of it. Okay. Well, now I might be able to. Okay, good. So we've got religious art here where we're seeing in the background here people inside things flying through the sky. And this is at the crucifixion of Jesus. Interesting. But there's more. So we'll go back here. Here's another one. Let's see if we can do the same. Oh, it's in this one as well. Oh, this is somebody's website with a lot of them. Okay, great. Oh, well, that's good. So here we have more religious art and the obvious UFOs all through the background. They're clearly not clouds, but you can see that there's clouds on them. Okay. Here again. And this one. Okay, now this is the Madonna with Saint Giovanni. And you see this here in the background. This has been pointed out by many people for a long time, since it was painted, that what is that? That appears to be a UFO. But wait, there's more. There's many, many, many examples of this. There's a lot of religious art. And the question is, why does all this religious art, there's one in particular, here's another good one. Oops. All right. That actually is a blow up of the one that we were just looking at. And this is actually the one that we're about to look at here. So, okay, well, here's the one we were looking at earlier as well. This one, this is so interesting. What is going on here? Why did religious artists, and you can see here our next painting from 1486, the Annunciation with St. Emedius, is in the National Gallery in London, shows a circular object shooting a thin beam of light down to the Virgin Mary. Why? Right? It's not just one example. There's so many different examples of this. And the question is, like, what's really going on here? Why do we constantly find all of these different religious art throughout history, not from modern times, that feature UFOs, and there's even more. But I think that gives us a pretty good idea that there seems to be something going on. It's not just me that thinks there might be a connection to UFOs, objects in the sky, to Jesus in the kingdom. And I think religious artists get away with a lot more than a clergyman. And so we find UFOs in religious art, lots of it. And you can just go and type in that very phrase into any search engine and look at the images that come up. So this is not some, modern idea that Israel Anderson has come up with. Religious artists have seen things this way for a long time. Shepherds in the field at night. Of course, the Bethlehem star. What star follows you? And, I've looked into that a lot, or I did maybe 20 years ago. And there's all kinds of arguments that have been put forward for what was the Bethlehem star. But the thing that makes the most sense, of course, was a UFO. There was a star that tracked them, showed them where to go, how to get there. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. At the birth of Jesus, this is extremely precious cargo, there would have been protection. These people would have been hanging around. Right? So, I think we've got a lot to reconsider in terms of what we've been told by Christianity and what may actually be true about the gospel of the kingdom. I think there's a lot more going on than what Christianity has told us, and Christianity has acted as a gatekeeper and threatened people with eternal damnation if you don't believe what they believe, especially the Catholics. The Protestants, not so much, but the Catholics all through the ages, if you don't believe what we believe, if you don't believe in the Trinity, or you're in deep trouble. Okay. The disciples didn't know what was going on, even as Jesus was leaving. They were like, wait, well, isn't this the time when you're going to restore the kingdom to Jerusalem? Like, no? Huh? Well, they didn't get it even at that time. Spent 3 years with him. His inner circle, being told things that other people weren't being told. Still didn't get it. So we've got to be careful about relying on the church fathers who came after that. None of the church fathers had any direct connection with Jesus. Most of them were centuries after. And yet they are effectively the ones that invented what we know today as Christianity. We don't have to be afraid of seeking first the kingdom. We don't. There's nothing to fear. Even, as I said at the very beginning of this, if we blank slate everything, Jesus just rises to the surface. He rises to the surface. Can't escape Jesus. So you might be a Christian watching this, and thank you for persisting, because I know some of this can be very grating, very hard to listen to. Just put Jesus first. Jesus didn't say Christianity is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes under the Father but through Christianity. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father but through me. He's the way. He's the truth. He is the life. Jesus also said that the path to destruction is broad and many find it. Today, Christianity has 2.5 billion adherents, the largest religious system that has ever existed. That's not the narrow path, the narrow gate that few find, is it? Jesus spoke of a remnant, not a great end-time revival, not 2.5 billion people strong religion. I feel it's my calling to speak and to try to speak to all, not just the Christian, but to the agnostic and the atheist who have been turned off by the greatest stumbling block towards meeting Jesus that there is, which is what? Christianity. There's no doubt about that. The greatest stumbling block that is put before the Lord's children on their way to discover who he is and to be in relationship with him is Christianity itself. Christianity wants you to believe in their religion. I want you to believe in Jesus. So I think with everything that's going on right now, that seems to be fulfilling all of these end-time prophecies, the UFOs in our skies, I think, is a really, really big tell. I think something is going on right now. You know, Jesus said, he left us with one very interesting clue. He said, I will be with you even until the end of the age. Now, Jesus was the water bearer. He was the bearer of the water of life. His whole ministry revolved around water. People say the first miracle was turning water into wine, but actually the first miracle was rising up out of the water at his baptism. But over and over again, all through his ministry, we see this connection to water. Because he is the water bearer. And we're moving from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, the water bearer, right now. We're in transition right now. We're in the transition period between these celestial ages. That's what Jesus was talking about when he said that he would be with us even unto the end of the age. There's been some misinterpretations of what Jesus was saying that gives this idea that everything was about to happen right then and there. No. He told us he would be with us even until the end of the age, when we move into the age of the water bearer, Jesus' age. And that's happening now. Praise his name. Are you excited? Because I'm excited. I'm tired right now, but I am very, very excited that we are soon to see Jesus face to face. And it will be a rough and calamitous ride to get to that point when Jesus restores peace to this earth. Maybe next week we'll talk a little bit about what that will be like, but I'll tell you a little now. We're not going anywhere. We're going to be right here. Those of us that survive will start to reassemble our lives, and we will continue life here without the tyrannists controlling our lives. The meek will inherit the earth. They will be put in charge of leadership positions throughout the earth. Things will be good. We will get to thrive. We will get to flourish. under the direct leadership of Jesus and his appointees here on this earth. We're not going anywhere for a long time. Eventually, we're leaving. We're leaving Earth, and yeah, it does look like that. Those that have died will be born again. There's no snapping of the fingers and somebody rematerializing in front of you, just like there wasn't for Jesus. He had to be born again. You, if you perish in this period of calamity, will be born again, just like Jesus was. And we will get to see each other, and the first will be last, the last will be first. So the last people that have perished will be the first ones brought back. And we will rebuild the human race through surrogacy as the entire human race is born again. And we're going to be here for a very, very long time, and it's going to be great. We'll explore more of that another time, maybe next week. All right? Now, my favorite part of Sunday service. And I know a lot of people tune out right at this point, but I wish you wouldn't. I know the fidelity of the streamed music from these hymns coming through is not always fantastic. But we keep playing the same hymns over and over again. We added a few new ones a few weeks ago because I want you to learn them, and I want you to be able to worship along with me. When we worship, it's like really having that strong connection to Jesus. You feel it inside. All my life, from the day that I gave my life to Jesus, which I remember very clearly, 11 years old, North Shore Faith Center, Pastor John Steele's church. Came in late, and it was a gospel message, and he asked people to come forward if they want to dedicate their lives to Jesus, and I came forward, and I've served him every day of my life ever since. And I think often it's the women who really get into worship, but historically it's been the men. And so how about both of us really start to lose ourselves to find that connection with the Father and the Son that really can't be found any other way except in worship. And we use this word worship. If you truly admire somebody, it might be your own father, okay? And some people don't have a great experience with their father, or like me, they don't have a father. I'm an orphan. I don't even know my father's name. But there's somebody in your life that you've really looked up to and admired and respected, and the person you would turn to for advice, and something happens, they're the shoulder you go and cry on, that kind of thing. And you have deep admiration and respect for that person. And if you were to speak of that person, it would just be an outpouring of love and affection and admiration. That's what we're talking about when we say we worship. So join me for the next 30 minutes as we sing these hymns and just become lost in Jesus. And I'm going to withhold hitting play here until I say goodbye, because otherwise YouTube kicks up a stink. They've done this a few times now. So we're going to start off with How Great Thou Art. And most of these hymns are by Chris Rice, and you can find them on Spotify. He has at least two albums of hymns. Some of these others are from others, including Shane and Shane and Phillips, Craig and Dean and Salah, Phil Wickham. But if you want to listen to some really good hymns, just go onto any music service and look up Chris Rice. He's a Christian musician, and these are great hymns. And I'm used to singing modern worship, but these are timeless. They're timeless classics, and they're beautiful. All right, let me pray and say goodbye to you this evening, and thank you for being here. And then let's spend some time with the Father and Son.